Thank you, Dr. Beleni. Now, it's a major challenge to address experts from public relations. I don't have expertise in this subject, so I'm at your mercy. But how do I view the Arab Spring from Southeast Asia? Rabi' al-Arabi, now I met many of these players who insist that the term must be changed to Thawra al-Arab, the Arab Revolution or People's Revolution. Because this is not just a demand for political change. This is a juxtaposition of ideas and values. How you govern, what are your values in terms of governance, in terms of role of culture, role of religion in society and politics. So it is therefore not just a demand for political change, but a systemic change. Jawaharlal Nehru in 1947, in the eve of India's independence, talked about three Swiss destiny. Ali Jinnah referred to the cyclonic revolution, the setting up of the new emerging Pakistan. But I think the demand is varied in the Arab world, hugely popular in the sense that it has not only became a catalyst for reform, but generated so much interest in the Indian subcontinent and in Southeast Asia. And people refer to it essentially a Muslim world. I don't believe so, because in my interaction with the non-Muslims in Malaysia, in India, they follow this with great interest. Because it is a juxtaposition of ideas and values, the whole dynamics change. People not only talk about a political system, people talk about the need to, the debate within Egypt or Tunisia or now Libya. What is the relevance of Islam in society? Why do we then discuss or debate or a new discourse on the compatibility of Islam and democracy? That is why I think to understand these societies is not necessarily to view from the dictates or discourse from Washington or London. Because in the Middle East or in the Muslim world, the issue of compatibility between Islam and democracy is no longer relevant. People just consider that as a fact. The only issue is relevance to what extent can religion play a part or influence in the policies and the system of governance. And I think it is a healthy debate, contrary to some of the concerns expressed elsewhere. I think it is a timely and healthy debate. What is the maqasid of the Sharia, the higher objective of the Sharia, in terms of peace, in terms of justice, in terms of gender equality, in terms of human rights? These issues has not been discussed, deliberated at the popular level, except for the considerations or discussions among the elite. Now, why the relevance now to relate to Wall Street? For us in Malaysia, for those clamoring for reform, for democratic transition, for our friends in Indonesia, who have seen in the largest Muslim country in the world, a democratic, peaceful transition from more than 30, 40 decades of dictatorship to a functioning, viable democracy without the presence of one foreign troop. And I think that's remarkable, contrary to what's happening in Iraq or more so in Afghanistan. That's why the popular view in the Muslim world has always been to get foreign occupation or occupiers out of these countries and these societies. But there are also some very huge concerns which would forestall the entire process. The role of the army, whilst you have generally this propensity for change, there is also a strong resistance to change, not only in terms of political power, but to the system that allows for human rights abuse, for endemic corruption, and allowing for abject poverty to be part and parcel of life and society. I go back to the issue of Wall Street and Occupy Wall Street. It is relevant because many of us in the Muslim world, in the Middle East, in the Arab world, whilst clamoring for reform, make it sound rather simplistic. Once you have freedom, we have democracy, then we actually are able to resolve most of our problems. This is certainly not so, because the complexities within a capitalist or a market economy is relevant. Now, I happen to be involved with the IMF and the World Bank in those days, so I'm not trying to be too apologetic here, but there is no known prescription for all societies, for all economies. So the understanding of what happened in the Occupy Wall Street movement is very relevant because it shows the flaws and fragility of what is deemed and considered as a market economy or capitalist society. I am for a market economy, but I am not for this complicity of the rich conglomerates with the political elite that condone such excesses. There is clear disconnect between the very rich and the very poor. You can't have a democracy to function and to be considered viable when you continue to have Gini coefficient, glaring difference of income level between the very rich and the very poor. We talk about Adam Smith, but I've been reminded by a colleague at Oxford that even Adam Smith in A Wealth of Nations made at least 17 references to the term inequality. You cannot understand Adam Smith without reading the theory of moral sentiments. So I think it is very pertinent, therefore, not to just have simplistic answers by having, for example, if we have elections, that will be necessarily the answer. Or you adopt a capitalist system, there will be an answer. So I think the development, the discourse in the Middle East is very pertinent. You actually are craving for answers to replace the obsolete, corrupt, draconian, autocratic rule, searching for independence. And this answers again a basic question that when one assumes that people actually, most of leaders in the Muslim world, in Malaysia, in Indonesia those days, they assume that people are not ready for democracy. And we don't want a democracy of the United States. What is democracy of the United States? I'm not talking about the excesses now. I'm not talking Bush, Islamophobia, and the strong penchant for unilateral solution, or the insensitive attitude towards the plight of the Palestinians. But when you talk about democracy, at least you should reread Tocqueville's Democracy in America. You talk about habits of the heart. You talk about the essence and relevance to the issue of ethics and religion in society. And this discourse is, to my mind, important. And I feel that this change, I had a lengthy discussion with Sheikh Rashid Ghannouchi in Tunisia, and I think it remains to be a controversy, but I share this sort of a new sentiment to view even Islam in a more moderate, tolerant sense that puts in the fiqh awlawiyat, in the list of priorities, issue of peace, of security, of employment, of efforts to combat endemic corruption and abject poverty. And finally, a note, a reminder, we can also learn from the experiences of our friends. Turkey is, of course, a shining example, not because we have Tayyip Erdogan who's been firm in his position vis-à-vis foreign policy, but in his domestic economic policies is impressive. Enhancement of the quality of education and quality of life, and public health, public housing, trying to reduce the gap between the very rich and the very poor. These are, to my mind, pertinent issues. And compare this to Indonesia, a remarkable, phenomenal experiment in recent times of the largest Muslim country in the world, transforming itself into a viable democracy with independent judiciary, free media, and a very strong arm in combating corruption. But Indonesia has to deal with two major issues, which will remain to be relevant in the Middle East, including at the time of this transition towards a viable democracy after the Thawrah or Al-Rabi' Al-Arabi, whatever. That is the issue of development, of the growing disparity between the very rich and the very poor, and the issue of endemic corruption that becomes a plague in many of our societies. And as a Muslim, I think it is one of the most deplorable aspects that we'll have to acknowledge is the measure, the level of tolerance that we as Muslims against endemic corruption and abject poverty is unacceptable and totally unacceptable. Thank you. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.